Chapter 5. Mr. Lawrence and Beth. Time went on, and the Lawrence mansion soon became a place where the March sisters felt welcome. And what good times were had! Meg could walk in the conservatory whenever she liked. Jo became quite attached to the library, and Amy copied pictures to her heart's content. But Beth could not find the courage to go over to the mansion and play the grand piano. She once went with Jo, but Mr. Lawrence had frightened her so with his gruff manner that she ran away. Nothing could convince her to return, until Mr. Lawrence himself learned of her fears and set out to mend matters. He sat in the Marches' parlor one day and started a conversation about music. "Wouldn't some of your girls like to run over and practice now and then?" he asked Mrs. March. "Just to keep it in tune. They needn't say anything to anybody. Just come and go as they please." Beth took a step forward and pressed her hands tightly together. This was too much of a temptation. "I'll come, if you are quite sure nobody will hear me," she said timidly. The next day, after a few tries, Beth made her way noiselessly into the drawing-room and ran her fingers along the top of the piano. She immediately forgot her fear and sat down to play. She played until dinner time, when Hannah came to fetch her. Then all she could do was sit at the table and smile. After that, she visited the Lawrences' grand piano every day. A few weeks later, Beth had a wonderful idea. "Mother, I'm going to make Mr. Lawrence a pair of slippers. He is so kind to me. I must thank him. May I?" "Yes, dear," her mother replied. "It will please him very much, and would be a nice way of thanking him." Beth wrote a simple note, and with Laurie's help, the note and slippers were smuggled into the old gentleman's study. The next afternoon, Beth went out to do an errand. When she returned, she saw the excited faces of her family and wondered what was going on. Her sisters led her to the parlor, and there stood a little piano with a letter addressed to Miss Elizabeth March from Mr. Lawrence. "For me?" Beth gasped, holding on to Jo. "Yes, just for you. Isn't it splendid of him?" Jo cried. Beth could barely bring herself to play. She was so excited. But when she did, everyone agreed it was the most remarkable piano they have ever heard. "You have to go and thank him," Jo said jokingly. She didn't think her shy sister would ever go. But Beth stood up at once. "Yes," she said. "I guess I'll go now before I get frightened thinking about it." And to her family's amazement, she walked straight through the garden to the Lawrences' front door. They would have been even more amazed had they seen what she did next. She knocked at the door to Mr. Lawrence's study, and when he yelled, "Come in," in his usual gruff voice, she walked right in up to the old gentleman. "I came to thank you, sir, for—" But she forgot her speech and didn't finish. Instead, she threw her arms around his neck and kissed him. From that moment on, Beth March was no longer afraid of the gruff Mr. Lawrence.